Hello, everyone. I'm David Younger,
Hi, I'm Elvin Aydın-Keles.
and we created Chronic Illness Therapy to provide support and resources for people living with chronic health conditions.
Here we are today with David. We want to talk about what's happening with parents who have a child with a chronic disease. What kind of challenges, difficulties, yearnings, and fantasies this kind of a dynamic will bring to the relationship, how to deal with it, how difficult it is, and how to possibly learn to thrive in a family when a child has a chronic disease.
Yeah, because we feel, obviously, as parents, we feel this profound sense of responsibility for, creating these human beings and giving them the best opportunities that we can, and taking care of them. And it reminds me of we have two kids, and Eric, our oldest, he does not have muscular dystrophy. It's a 50% chance, and when we started thinking, all right, we want to try for a second kid, we were exploring using pre-implantation genetic testing. Mm-hmm. And so we had to go through this process where we had to get genetic material from us and from my parents and from Eric. And we had this scare where we thought that the test was wrong and that he did have the muscular dystrophy. And I remember so vividly, Debbie was in Peru. We had moved from London to New York. Wow. And then we were spending 6 months in Peru before coming back to New York. And Debbie was already in Peru, and I was in Dallas visiting my friend. And I spoke to this genetic counselor, and she said, it looks like, I don't know what happened, but it looks like the tests were wrong and that he does have it. And I then called my parents and I tried to tell them. And it was the only time in my entire life where they answered the phone. My mother answered the phone. And I tried talking and I couldn't talk. And it wasn't because I was crying so much that I couldn't talk. I literally just I couldn't say it. I couldn't get a word out. And at that point, it was so raw and so much of a shock that I couldn't, I can't say even what it was. It was mostly this feeling of knowing what I have. Like, I don't want him to have to go through everything that I've gone through. Thankfully, this is a story with a happy ending. And obviously, what we're talking about, there are times when, as a parent, and I've been in many meetings for the FSH Society, the Muscular Dystrophy, where there are parents whose kids have it, and they're dealing with this whole process of how to talk to them about it, how to deal with it, and just the immense grief and sense of guilt and sense of responsibility. And as a parent, there are few things that are harder.
Wow. And so how could they make that, what caused that kind of a mix-up? It wasn't a mix-up, or is that normal for
It's not normal. It's actually something quite detailed, technical, and quite complicated in terms of the disease, where they're literally like, there are parts of the gene that flip from one. I can't even explain it. It's something rare that happened that made it look like, when they did the pre-implantation testing, that he did have it, but he really didn't.
The first rule then always get a second opinion, right?
Yes, second and third, and if you need to.
I remember when I was a child, my parents one day were like, as if someone died in the house. And we had just been for a routine blood test for me. I think I had an infection or something. And then they only told it to me afterwards. I didn't understand what was wrong with them. The lab told them that I have diabetes. So, and then second day they called and they said, oops, we made a mistake. I'm very sorry. We're very sorry. And, she doesn't have diabetes. But, I remember the kind of shock and incomprehensible feelings that they've gone through. So it's just only, I'm not discounting anything, but, it's manageable. It's much easier to manage than muscular dystrophy and many other diseases. Even that was such a burden for them for a day, to carry. But I
Yeah,
can't even begin to imagine what you went through with that phone call.
yeah, and it was excruciating. But to your point, when it comes to your kids, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's diabetes or asthma or
Yeah.
muscular dystrophy. It's just there's this just profound nonverbal sense of responsibility, love, and it's like the, that you feel that you can't even. It's the kind of thing that, just like you can't tell someone what it's going to be like to be a parent, you can't tell someone what it's going to be like to have that
Also, I think
feeling.
apart from that, every child represents hope for every parent.
Mm,
Everything they couldn't be, they wanted to be. They couldn't have what they wanted to have. And all of us glorify our children and we dream dreams for them, no matter what comes true or whether they want it or not, isn't it? It's about us reliving our dreams. There's another, it's almost being given another take in life. I don't know about you, but that's how I feel. And I observe it in other parents as well, and it's almost like that hope being crushed. That is a profound loss
mm,
in anyone's psyche, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then
So yeah.
there's that, and then there's the question of, all right, well, what do you do when you've got this diagnosis, and how do you deal with it yourself as a parent? How do you deal with it as a couple, and how do you deal with it with your child?
Mhm.
They're kind of, I would say, if you had to break it down, those are the three big areas. And um, I have personal experience having a mother who had muscular dystrophy, and then finding out that I had it,
Mhm.
and then have the experience working with people. Now, most of the people I work with are people with chronic illnesses, not people with kids with chronic illnesses. So, but I've definitely been in these group meetings with people whose kids have chronic illnesses
Mhm.
as well.
Well, I know people whose children turn out to have lupus, even though they don't have it themselves. And they found it through renal failure, which is very scary
Mm,
in a 10-year-old child. And then I know people like the mom sort of say either passed away or is in the process of dying of BRCA1 and 2, the breast cancer genes,
yeah.
which also can cause the ovarian cancers. And then they found out their daughters have it. I mean, the kind of profound sadness and loss, and how do they deal with it, and how does the child deal with it, but how do the parents deal with it? I mean, I know from my husband, who's also a neurosurgeon who works with oncology like tumors, and he saw many times that when a child is sick or dies, parents get a divorce because they cannot bear the feeling. And I bet it's the same for a lot of moms. When the child turns out to have a chronic disease, the father finds it too difficult, and then often takes off and it's the mother's responsibility to take it, or maybe the mother takes off and it's the father's. I mean, this is very common that one parent just bails off. How can we deal with situations like these? How can we prevent these situations? How can we make our relationship become stronger during these times? And I think there's a lot to talk about there.
Yes. And I mean, this is a very simple response to that question is, I think in those cases, therapy becomes not a luxury or an option, but a necessity. Because it's something that, you know, everyone going through that needs help and support. Because there are going to be phases of dealing with it. And the initial grief and shock, if it's not addressed and dealt with, is certainly enough to break up a lot of couples, um, most couples, and it will evolve. And you know, it's just like with the, it's not unlike the death of a loved one. It's that, you know, you have that initial shock and acute pain and disbelief, and as time goes on, if you go through this process and you talk about it and you deal with it, it evolves because nothing stays the same.
Yes, but not knowing in the beginning of that process that it will evolve, that's the biggest challenge, I think. You feel that profound despair, you feel that it's all ended for you and for that family, for that child. And I think what you're talking about is very, very important. For me, when you said that therapy is a necessity, it's almost like creating a space in a room where there is no space left, you know, where you thought you didn't have space.
Mm,
What we do in therapy is literally creating that space and making it thinkable, making it workable. And it's shocking to find different ways of working, even if it involves a loss, that people think that what else is there to talk about? There is a lot, actually.
yes. And especially in the beginning, when it's so hard to find the words, it's so hard to put words the to those feelings, is you know, having someone who's not going through it, who can help you to um, just even sit with the feelings and feel the feelings, um, and to start to put words to the feelings.
Definitely. And it's almost like for people who have not experienced this kind of experience before, that's what I'm going to describe it. It's almost like when you start naming names, like your feelings, what we call articulating them, it's almost like creating handles around a thing that could not be held in any way. It's almost like, oh, suddenly you have these handles and you can just turn it around or move it or manage it. It's that that's amazing. Like you can start finding ways to deal with something that previously felt it's gonna engulf you.
I love that image, that metaphor. Yeah, putting handles on it.
Yeah.
It's so true. But it will be for sure. It's a, you know, an excruciating, painful uh, process with lots of ups and downs, and um, there are no guarantees, and uh, but that's why, you know, to not talk about it or to not deal with it, to not seek help, is just not, is not an option.
And every family, because every family have their own culture, they need to find their own tools. They need to find their own way of handling it. Unfortunately, we cannot claim that there is a way to deal with it which will fit every family, because we are so different from each other. Every family does their things their own way. And I really cannot emphasize it enough. It's so important to develop your own way of coping, whatever it is that you're facing.
Yes. I mean, you know, my parents told me about it when I was diagnosed. So before I can even remember, I found out. And they tried talking to me about it at different times, not too many times, but I gave the clear message that I didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't want to tell other people about it. I didn't, and as long as I was able to do most of the things I was able to do, I just wanted to live as though that it wasn't something that I was going to have to deal with. Uh, I That came at a cost. I mean, I think there were benefits in terms of kind of integrating and pushing myself to do a lot of different things, and not taking myself out of the equation too early. But
Psychologically, I know.
psychologically and emotionally, my God, I mean, there had huge consequences, and
So
I think
couldn't express here in a more desired way, so to say, you ended up acting out in other ways that could be potentially harmful to you.
yes,
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
that's one area for sure. Acting out, and then what do we need as kids when we act out? We need for our parents to see beyond the behavior and understand and make connections, help us to make connections. So that didn't happen. So yeah, that's one aspect. But I actually think that um, a big part of the reason why I can't viscerally remember a lot of things from childhood is because of this compartmentalization, because of this, like, that's part of what got sacrificed. It's like
Mm-hmm.
when you ask people, well, I do this all the time in therapy with people, is doing some imagery work with them and bringing them back to when they were a kid, and they can really feel it and see it and experience it. And often, not everyone, but a lot of people can, and I cannot. And I think that has a lot to do with the denial that I was experiencing.
Yeah. And I wonder how your parents, because we're talking about, this is a good example to talk about, I think, if that's okay with you. How did your parents, you think, cope in terms of their relationship? I think it's a very important aspect that we need to discuss here. I mean, to give people.
Absolutely.
Mm.
My not wanting to deal with it allowed them to also not deal with it. They had to deal with it in terms of my mother's condition
Mhm.
and making adaptations, but there just wasn't a lot of, they weren't in therapy.
Mhm.
They didn't go to couples therapy. I wasn't in therapy. So there wasn't, I mean, I think there was a familial
Mhm.
way of not dealing with it as a way of dealing with it.
I think it's also because the progress in this particular disease is not immediate.
Hmm.
And your mother's illness in that moment was much more, her symptoms were much more immediate, I think, and they had to deal with that too.
Hmm.
I wonder if they could have done the same, could have adopted the same coping mechanism if your symptoms were immediate as well, so to say. If you had another disease that required immediate attention as opposed to, we'll just have to wait and see.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. It would have been impossible to ignore and to pretend like it wasn't there.
Want to call it ignore. I mean, you also
Right.
have to appreciate that this is a very difficult situation. It involves so much uncertainty. When will it begin? How will it evolve? How will it, affect the life of our child? And not knowing all that. I mean, how do you deal with that kind of uncertainty? The only thing you can do is to forget about it and wait, isn't
Right.
it? So I wouldn't call it ignoring, really.
No,
In that
that's
case.
true. It, I think, yeah, obviously they were going through their so much of that fear and guilt and uncertainty, and seeing me be able to do a lot of things, I'm sure gave them hope and made them feel good, even though they knew that I had the same diagnosis. But um, there is a helplessness there. I mean, you can talk about it, but that's not going to do It's not going to fix it or make it go away.
Exactly. And I'm very interested in that hopelessness. How do couples deal with that hopelessness? And I remember taking part at a seminar in London. Do you remember Earl Hopper?
Hmm.
Yeah, he gave a seminar on hope. And he talked about that there is no hope until there's despair in some situations. So, exactly as you said, you did not allow yourself to despair. And that's why you didn't start coping the way you need to.
Yes.
The moment you felt the despair, because it was unavoidable, I think you needed to look for hope. And I think that's when you took up something.
Yeah. And now I'm thinking about the couple dynamic, and when you allow yourself to feel the despair and to engage in the struggle, and the uncertainty, not knowing, are we going to make it through this? Because there are no guarantees. And then if you allow yourself to just really to face that versus hiding from it, and you do make it through it, it does, if you continue to work on it and to see it, it makes you stronger. It does.
And it makes your love become something amazing in that relationship. That attachment becomes much more stronger. But as you said, it does involve going through that very difficult time and not, for the lack of a better word, jerking back when it hurts so much. You know, when we, I don't know if I gave this metaphor before, but when I did yoga, one of the things the yoga teacher said, let's say when we're bending down, you know, just your hip hurts or your back hurts. And she said, try to breathe and go through that pain. That's where your growth will come. And if you just jerk back with the pain, you will never progress. And I think it stayed with me. It's such a huge metaphor with what you're trying to say right now.
Absolutely. And that, I mean, that to me also is why I love mindfulness. And I mean, that's what it's about, is really about recognizing and forming a different relationship to your own experience. It's not about achieving some sort of end point, like I'll get over this and then I'll never have to suffer again. But it's about how do we have, like, really becoming aware of these relationships that we have to our own experiences, and realizing that we can change those relationships. Those are not fixed, that we have power and agency over that. And that's empowering, and that's hope.
And I love that word, agency. I
Yeah.
think such an important term that people need to, I think it's quite a foreign term for a lot of people. And I think what you mean by agency, the way I understand, is the ability to relate to the other and represent yourself while you do that. So be yourself, but still in relationship to the other. And
Mm,
that's quite a task.
it is.
And it's called agency
Yes.
in our language.
Right.
Such a such an important skill.
Right.
I really hope that people can remember this word agency when they're dealing with, you know, with a diagnosis that is life altering, and that don't stay in themselves only in trying to find answers, but reach out to experts, doctors, therapists, online support groups, offline support groups, to each other, which is so important, because when we start thinking together, we can think much more creatively as opposed to blaming each other. That's the other thing. I think we need to understand that making the other person not okay is not the only way to make ourselves okay.
Mm.
You know, that the outcome was not okay doesn't mean that one of us was not okay. It can just, you know, this is life. These things happen,
Well,
unfortunately.
and we see the impact of that in politics, like how that, I mean, that's a way that is getting played out, this sort of black and white, like good versus evil. Um,
Well, it's a very primitive human need.
mm,
Let's put it that way. If you find yourself in that situation, don't judge yourself, because that's a very basic inclination that we all have. And what are you prepared to do to go past that is the question, I think. And that's a huge task.
It is. Well, this was a great, rich discussion, and thank you all for joining us. And please like this video and share it if it was helpful, and subscribe to get future videos, and check us out on Facebook at Chronic Illness Therapy and our website, chronicillnesstherapy.com. See you soon.